Hey there! Tonight's story is about bloodlines, the kind that carry not just names, but curses. Long, winding legacies of betrayal, hubris, vengeance, and tragedy that pass from generation to generation like a poisoned inheritance. This is the story of the most cursed families in Greek mythology, where fathers fall, sons avenge, daughters suffer, and fate watches silently from the wings. You won't need to keep track of every name. Just follow the pattern. Glory, downfall, and the long echo of ancient sins. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe. But only if it actually brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off to the same quiet story. So, settle in, let the torchlight flicker, and trace the lineages that history couldn't forget, no matter how much they begged it to. We begin our journey into the most cursed families of Greek mythology with a dinner invitation. But this is not the sort of feast you'd like to attend. It's the sort of meal that becomes legend for all the wrong reasons. At its head sits Tantalus, king of Lydia and favoured son of Zeus, at least once upon a time. Now, Tantalus wasn't your average mortal. He was granted the rare honour of dining at the table of the gods themselves, lounging amongst ambrosia and nectar, partaking in divine conversation. For a while it seemed he had it all: status, wealth, access to Olympus. But as with most mortals given a seat too close to the heavens, he made the rather unfortunate choice of trying to outwit the gods. And so, in a gesture of pure madness, or perhaps twisted curiosity, Tantalus invited the gods to a feast of his own. A banquet prepared in his palace with golden vessels and ivory platters. And at the centre of it all he served stew, rich, fragrant stew, the main ingredient, his own son, Pelops. This was not a culinary misstep. This was a test. Tantalus, in his arrogance, wanted to see whether the gods could tell what they were eating. Could divine beings truly detect mortal meat when disguised with garlic and herbs? Could he trick omniscience? As one might expect, the gods were not amused. Most recognized the atrocity immediately and refused to partake. Poseidon pushed away his bowl in disgust. Hermes turned pale. But Demeter, distracted by grief over her abducted daughter Persephone, absent-mindedly nibbled on a shoulder before anyone could stop her. The gods, horrified, brought Pelops back to life, reassembling him like a macabre puzzle, and replacing the missing shoulder with one of ivory. The young man, to his credit, returned to the land of the living with remarkably little complaint. But Tantalus was cast into the deepest pits of Tartarus, where he would forever stand in a pool of water beneath fruit-laden branches, unable to drink or eat. The water always recedes, the fruit always pulls away. Thus we have the word tantalize, to reach forever and grasp nothing. And so begins the tragedy of the house of Atreus. A tale so thoroughly soaked in treachery, vengeance, and familial bloodshed that it makes other dynasties look positively functional by comparison. Pelops, restored and glistening with his new ivory shoulder, went on to marry Hippodamia, the daughter of King Oenomaus. But even that came at a cost. King Oenomaus, fearing a prophecy that his son-in-law would kill him, devised a deadly courting ritual. He would challenge each of his daughter's suitors to a chariot race. If the suitor lost, he'd be killed, usually rather spectacularly, and his severed head nailed to the palace walls for display. Many tried, none succeeded, until Pelops came along. Clever rather than brave, Pelops decided to stack the odds in his favour. He convinced the king's charioteer, Myrtilus, to sabotage the king's vehicle, replacing the bronze linchpins with ones made of wax. During the race, the heat melted the wax. The chariot collapsed. Oenomus died in a tangle of limbs and horses. Pelops married Hippodamia, and Myrtilus, expecting a reward, reminded Pelops of their deal, which, depending on the version, included a promise of one night with the bride. Pelops did what many mythological heroes do when someone becomes inconvenient. He pushed Myrtilus off a cliff. As the charioteer plummeted to his death, he laid a curse on Pelops and all his descendants. It is this curse, born not of divine wrath, but of personal betrayal, that truly haunts the house of Atreus. Pelops and Hippodamia had children, sons who would carry the curse forward like a poisoned torch. Chief among them were Atreus and Thyestes. Now, the feud between Atreus and Thyestes is the stuff of family nightmares. It makes sibling squabbles over inheritance look charming. When the throne of Mycenae became vacant, the two brothers competed for power. Initially, Atreus seemed the rightful heir, but Thyestes tricked him out of the throne by seducing Atreus's wife and stealing a golden lamb, a symbol of kingship. Having been thoroughly betrayed, Atreus plotted revenge with the same culinary flair that had defined his grandfather. He invited Thyestes to a reconciliation banquet. The wine flowed, the courses were lavish, Thyestes ate heartily. Then Atreus presented the heads and hands of Thyestes' sons on a platter, revealing that he had unknowingly dined on his own children. Yes, again with the cannibalism. You might be noticing a pattern. The gods, if they were still watching, must have winced. But there were no lightning bolts this time. No divine retribution. Only the heavy silence of a curse continuing to seep into the stonework of the palace. Thyestes, devastated, fled. He consulted an oracle, hoping for some form of justice. The oracle, cryptic as always, told him the only way to avenge his children was to father another child with his own daughter, Pelopeia, which he did, quietly, disguised. Pelopeia later gave birth to a son named Aegisthus. And yes, if you're counting, that makes Aegisthus both son and grandson to Thyestes. Aegisthus was raised under strange circumstances and only later discovered his true parentage. Meanwhile, Atreus maintained power, and the next generation began to come of age. Atreus had two sons of his own, Agamemnon and Menelaus. They were raised in a court haunted by betrayal and blood. When Agamemnon came of age, he married Clytemnestra, and Menelaus married Helen. Yes, that Helen, the one whose abduction sparked the Trojan War. But before ships could sail, the winds died. The fleet sat motionless in the harbour. Agamemnon had offended Artemis, goddess of the hunt. Some say he killed one of her sacred stags. Others claim he boasted of being the better hunter. Either way, Artemis demanded a price, the sacrifice of his daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon faced an impossible choice. He chose ambition. Iphigenia was summoned under false pretenses, told she was to marry Achilles, and then led to the altar. In some versions, Artemis replaced her with a deer at the last moment. In others, she died. Either way, the moral debt was incurred, a debt that would be collected soon enough. Agamemnon sailed to Troy. 10 years passed, 10 long, brutal years. And when at last he returned home triumphant, he brought with him a Trojan princess, Cassandra, as a war prize and concubine. An insult Clytemnestra did not take lightly. She had waited. She had brooded. She had taken Aegisthus as her lover, and when Agamemnon stepped into his palace, she welcomed him with warm smiles, soft robes, and a bath. Then she killed him, possibly with an axe, possibly entangled in a net. The details vary, but the outcome does not. Cassandra, cursed always to speak truth, and never be believed, was murdered too. The palace once again soaked in royal blood. Now the curse turned to the children of Agamemnon, Electra and Orestes. Exiled, grieving, and vengeful, they plotted their return. Years later, Orestes crept back into Mycenae. With Electra's help, he killed Aegisthus. Then in a final shattering act, he murdered his mother. Matricide. A crime so terrible, even the gods refused to look away. Orestes fled, hounded by the Furies, ancient spirits of vengeance. They were relentless, shrieking, clawing, driving him mad. He found no peace. He begged Apollo for help. The gods sent him to Athens, where the matter was put before a court, the Areopagus. This trial, recounted in Aeschylus's Eumenides, is more than a mythic episode. It marks a cultural shift, from blood vengeance to civic justice. Athena, goddess of wisdom, cast the deciding vote. Orestes was acquitted, and the Furies, soothed and renamed the Kindly Ones, were given a new role as protectors of justice rather than instruments of wrath. And so, the house of Atreus, after generations of horror, finally found a form of peace. Not through revenge, but through law. Through a jury, not a sword. The curse, it is said, was broken. But of course, stories never end so neatly. The legends of Atreus remained alive in the Greek mind for centuries. The family became a symbol of how wrongdoing echoes down generations, how the past grips the present, and how even the greatest houses can rot from within. They were reminders that pride, ambition, and betrayal never go unpunished. Not by gods, not by fate, not by memory. And so we leave them now. Picture the palace of Mycenae, its golden halls dimmed, its stones bearing silent witness to secrets too old to speak. The dining table sits empty. Somewhere in the shadows, a servant sweeps the floor where kings once bled. Outside, the wind rustles through olive trees, and above, the stars flicker with quiet indifference. The house is still, but the echoes remain. When we last left the house of Atreus, the air in Mycenae was thick with blood, curses, and the smell of reheated vengeance. Atreus had fed his brother his own children. The gods had largely stepped back in exhausted silence, and Agamemnon, Atreus' son, was preparing for war. Now we turn our attention more closely to Agamemnon himself. You may have heard of him in passing, most likely as the leader of the Greeks in the Trojan War, or that king with the daughter sacrificing problem. And both are true, though neither does justice to the man's particular talent for choosing the worst possible option in almost any situation. To begin, Agamemnon was king of Mycenae, a powerful Bronze Age city-state said to glitter with gold, command armies, and echo with secrets. His wife was Clytemnestra, a formidable woman in her own right, clever, proud, and with a memory like a steel trap. Together they ruled Mycenae and had several children, including Iphigenia, Electra, and Orestes. Then came Paris, not the city, the Trojan prince. He arrived in Sparta and stole away Helen, who happened to be Clytemnestra's sister, and, unfortunately for everyone involved, the wife of Agamemnon's brother Menelaus. What followed was less a family reunion and more a pan-Hellenic temper tantrum. Menelaus wanted his wife back. Agamemnon, ever the statesman, agreed to lead the charge. The other kings and warriors of Greece, some eager and some less so, were gathered under Agamemnon's banner. But the gods had ideas of their own. As the fleet prepared to sail from Aulis, the winds died,